I'd love to pass over to Jessica, who is our moderator for today. So please take it away. I'm so excited for this one.
Thank you so much, Mercy, for that address. As was previously mentioned, my name is Jessica and I'm the Sponsorship and Liaison Officer for Warwick Inspire. Thank you to all the panelists for choosing to spend their Sunday today with us and in discussing such an important topic, which is the education system. We will do our very best to unpack as much as possible during the next 50 minutes. However, before we do that, we are going to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves and to also say briefly what education means to them. So I'm going to start off with Sienna.
Hi, my name is Sienna. I'm autistic, dyspraxic, dyslexic, and I also have ADHD. I'm a neurodiversity advocate. In 2018, I started Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which is a global campaign to focus on the positives of neurodiversity instead of the negatives. Currently, I have over 680,000 students subscribed across the world. For me, education means everyone having a right to get access to information. Too often, people with disabilities are excluded from education, and I think this is just abhorrent, and that's why I do a lot of my advocacy to combat that.
Thank you so much, Sienna, for sharing that with all of us today. We are so happy to have you here. Tosin, would you like to go next?
Of course. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. So I studied law at the London School of Economics and did my legal practice course, a master's at a law university called BPP. And I'm currently working as a trainee lawyer in a Magic Circle law firm in London. My training contract is split between London and Dubai. And I founded higher education in my first year of university to help students from disadvantaged backgrounds with getting into top universities. So it's basically like a mentoring network, and we pair students up with a mentor who helps them with their university application and their final year of sixth form. And Jessica is one of our ex-mentees, so I'm very, very honored to have been invited back by her now that she's got into a fantastic university as well. We also have a podcast which highlights some of the work that our mentors do and some key education policy updates. And in my spare time, I enjoy creative writing, traveling, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Tosin. Yes, I was an ex-mentee for higher education, and they helped me so much with my biology A-level and also with my personal statement to university. So it's lovely to have you here as well, Tosin. Jess, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I was actually confused because there's two of us. I was like, oh my God, are people talking to me? I'm Jessica. I'm a third year medical student at King's College London. And similar to what Sienna said about education, I'm really passionate about removing as many barriers as possible to accessing knowledge that should be available to everyone, to be honest. And yeah, I've also got involved with a lot of mentoring and organizations that encourage students from disadvantaged backgrounds to get into medicine, kind of diversify the medical curriculum. And yeah, I've started like my own website and mentoring scheme as well for those students. So that's me.
That's so amazing. Thank you also, Jess, for sharing that and for sharing a bit about your experience as well. So we are just waiting on V, but she should be joining us soon. And one of our panelists couldn't make it today, but she did send in a pre-recorded message, which we will be playing at the end of the panel. But in the meantime, I would just ask the following question, and then once V joins, she can answer the question or the following questions to come. So the first question that I had is, education looks very, very different due to COVID-19. So now a lot of online learning has moved online, and it's a completely different experience. A lot of students do not have access to the facilities that they once had, such as the libraries, such as the gyms, or anything that could either better their mental health or their education. So my question to all of you is, how do you view the current change? Do you see any benefits, any negatives? Like, what is your view? I'll start with Tosin to answer.
Yeah, of course. So I have quite mixed feelings about the current change, because when the pandemic hit, I was actually doing my legal practice course, and we had started the course at physical doing classes in real life, and then we had to move on to online learning. And I quickly saw how difficult that can be, just in terms of concentration and being able to like engage with people. Not having that same human contact can be so difficult. But at the same time, I'm one of those people that kind of benefited from it in a way, because I really appreciated the opportunity for things like online exams, etc. I think I definitely did a lot better in the online exams than I would have if I had to do them in real life, because they were open book, etc. So I do welcome things like open book exams, because in real life you'll be able to have access to so many different resources. So it kind of shows the cracks in the exam system before, where you had to just memorize a bunch of things and then do the exam. So I do welcome that, but I am aware of how difficult it can be to concentrate. And I think employers and universities need to take that into consideration, because it is so difficult for students these days, as well as, like you mentioned, students not having access to things like gyms, etc., going out and seeing friends, which are some things that are so key for people's mental health. And as we know, mental health is so important when it comes to studying, etc. So I think those things need to be considered, and employers and universities need to be a lot more empathetic towards students in that sense. And yeah, we need to continue having this conversation to figure out just how students would like to move forward.
Thank you, Tosin. Yeah, I completely agree. I feel as well that for a lot of students it's been extremely hard to cope, especially, but there's also been benefits, which is also important to highlight, that you've also raised. So now we have V. So V has just joined us. Before we ask our other panelists in regards to the question, V, do you quickly want to explain, introduce yourself, and also explain what education means to you?
Yes, first of all, I'm so sorry for being late. I could not find the link and things were just going wrong, but thank you so much for having me. My name is V Kativu. I'm 22 years old and I'm an education and empowerment YouTuber. I graduated from Oxford in July 2020 and then began my master's in September 2020. Why I didn't take a break, I'll never know. But yeah, I'm almost graduating now in May of 2021, which I'm very excited about. And your question was, what does education mean to me?
Yeah, so just explain briefly what education means to you.
So education for me is a tool. It's a tool that gives me access to whatever I want in this world. My mom always raised me to believe that knowledge is power, and that's one thing that no one can ever take away from you. So I think that education for me is a big part of my journey to self-empowerment, for me to have my own confidence, for me to assert myself in the world. I feel my education allows me to do that and opens doors for me. So yeah, I think education is a gift that a lot of us take for granted and a lot of people in the world don't have, and I'm helping fight for that. But yeah, I'd have to summarize it and say education is a gift.
Thank you so much, Fee, for introducing yourself, and apologies for the link delay.
My fault, don't worry, thank you.
Sienna, so in regards to the previous questions, do you want to answer in regards to your views on how education looks like now? And if there's benefits, is there negative? What do you take on it?
I mean, there are both benefits and negatives. A story that I like to tell is there was a girl who contacted me through my neurodiversity work, and she told me, I'm autistic and I have a sensory processing disorder that makes everything louder and everything more overwhelming. And she said that she couldn't go into school anymore because she was in a big lecture hall and she just couldn't handle it, and she was having panic attacks, and it meant that she couldn't access education. And so she contacted her school and she said, could you give me the reasonable adjustment of letting me learn from home? And they said, absolutely not. That's not something that we can do. That's not a service we could ever offer. We don't have the resources to do it, and you're unreasonable to ask for something like that. And so she dropped out of school. She dropped out of school in March. And a month later, everything was online. Everything was virtual. Everything was the way she begged for it to be, and the way they had said we absolutely cannot do. And so education wasn't accessible to her. She'd already dropped out. She had already kind of forgone that opportunity. But, you know, there is a benefit in that now people who are in her situation are able to learn from home. They're able to have access to education. And so I do see that as a plus. There are a lot of autistic people who struggle to be in the school environment. But there are also negatives. Obviously, doing everything online, you need access to a laptop. You need access to stable Wi-Fi, and there are a lot of people that don't have that. Another drawback of just not so much everything being online, but just this whole COVID situation, is there are a lot of disabled people who really need a routine. Autistic people and in general really value that routine, really value structure, really value predictability. And I've had a lot of autistic people contact me and say that they are so overwhelmed because one day they're told, hey, you're going to be back in school in May. And then another day they're told, oh no, it's March, it's April. Oh, you know, you're going to have a lesson in this room. No, because of COVID regulations, you're not going to have a lesson in this room. Oh, you're going to have to be taught by this teacher. Oh, wait, that's not going to happen anymore because he was in a class with somebody else. And there's so much that is up in the air that is actually traumatic to a lot of people. I don't think it's just an autistic thing. My sister is also just really struggling with the fact that she has no idea what tomorrow is going to look like, no idea what next week is going to look like. And so that is definitely a drawback to this whole COVID situation.
Thank you for sharing, Sienna. And yeah, like you said, I think COVID has definitely allowed for people who once didn't have access to education to have that access to education. And I think sometimes we forget that COVID has allowed for there to be that better access for people who didn't have that access before. So thank you for sharing. Jess, would you like to share your view?
Kind of echoing what people have said already, because I'm a medical student, I've actually still got in-person teaching and kind of seen it from the side of what COVID looks like for patients and for people who are still working. So obviously I'm going into a career that cannot just go online and is not going to stop, or whether it's Christmas, snowing, COVID. So I still got in-person teaching, but a lot of things were cancelled. And in one aspect, that kind of shift online was so beautifully done. Like, I was shocked at how much we could just mobilize our education to being online, but it's definitely made me struggle with a routine and things just changing all the time. There are so many U-turns, there's so much uncertainty, and I can 100% understand how that's really, really damaging for students, because even though I go in person sometimes, I still find it difficult to keep up with university because there's just I just don't know what tomorrow's going to look like, like Sienna says.
Thank you, Jess. And yeah, in terms of the whole unpredictability of never knowing how 2 days don't look the same, it's definitely something I feel a lot of students can also relate to. With V, do you want to share your view on how education looks like now, the benefits, the downsides?
I mean, kind of like echoing what everyone is saying, there are many benefits to being online because you now have people all over the world who may not have been able to attend certain, I don't know, really cool lectures in a certain country, or even attend certain universities that they wanted to because they physically couldn't relocate because of, you know, commitments to family, to jobs, and to anything else of that nature. And now you've got this thing where you got the world literally at your hands in a laptop. And I think it's the same as what Sienna was saying before about how a lot of people were very adamant, oh no, this job role, you must be able to drive here, you must be here in person. Now we're very much proving actually you can adjust and you can find a way of making sure you include me without me physically having to be there. So I think there are a lot of benefits that especially financially, even for me, I had to decide whether or not to take my offer at Harvard, and a large factor that played into me saying yes to it online was because about $40,000 was knocked off because it was now online. And I was like, financially, this is the wisest thing I could ever do. So I feel like a lot of people in my class were able to take this course this year because they could afford it finally, whereas before $85,000 that's a lot of money, you know. So I think that the benefits of the pandemic is that it's making things a little bit more accessible. The drawbacks, once again, like echoing what the panelists were saying, there's that large unpredictability. There's also the fact that you're missing out on certain things that I feel like an in-person education can give you, you know, like the experience of maybe networking, those one-on-ones, having that chat with your tutor, or maybe they catch your eye in the classroom and notice you're dozing off or you're not really understanding it, and they can have that more personal interaction. Whereas online, once that laptop is closed, the laptop is closed, you know. So I feel like there are certain things that we're missing, but overall it's making a lot of people who once couldn't be at at the table, come to the table. And I think that's a beautiful thing. They just obviously, as we move out of the pandemic and move back into regular life, we've got to find a way of combining the two worlds and saying, we're not just going to say, hey, back to the way things were, nothing's online. No, because you know that it works now. So I think some form of a hybrid model in the end will suffice, where, you know, those who do want that in-person experience, because I know I work better in person, can have that, and those who can't, you know, fly over all over the world can still work from their rooms. So I think overall, being online, the pandemic, it's had its benefits, but it's also got its drawbacks. So yeah.
Thank you, V, for your answer. And yes, a hybrid model is definitely an interesting, you know, way in going forward, and only time will tell how the education system will really utilize some of what we've learned from COVID-19. So thank you. The next question that I have is about diversity. So as some of you may be familiar with, the education's curriculum, the curriculum is very Eurocentric. So what that means is that it's not diverse. It doesn't represent everyone's backgrounds. So for English literature in A-level or GCSEs, or history, A-level GCSEs, a lot of people's histories are not reflected. For English A-level, a lot of the novels are by white men, to be quite frank. So my question to all of you is, how can the education system really incorporate diversity to ensure that everyone is being reflected and students can succeed? I'll start with Jess.
This is quite a hard question, and I think one thing I've realised is that we'll never be able to cater to all, which is quite a controversial thing to say, but it's good to keep that in mind. The UK education system will never be completely diverse and cater for every single person and their backgrounds and everything like that, but it is definitely failing in the simple basics of, you know, allowing us to apply knowledge to a wide range of people. Like, we're just not getting enough like variety in our education. When it comes to medicine, I think we're definitely seeing a radical change, and we're trying to kind of shake loose of this word diversity and more talk about decolonization of the curriculum. So diversifying the curriculum is like, you know, adding a few bits here and there, you know, oh yeah, you learn about slavery for Black people, that's a diverse curriculum. We want to decolonize it. We want to make that part of the main bulk of the curriculum. So for medicine, like most people probably heard of Malone, who's created a book called Mind the Gap, basically showing dermatological conditions on Black and brown skin, which is shocking that that's not the norm. And I've been through so many lessons where every picture on the PowerPoint was white, and being like showing up as red or becoming like breathless and turning blue, it's just not applicable. And it's the movement of that towards saying, oh yeah, you know, there are also Black and brown people, that is going to be difficult, but I think we're getting there. I do like to remain optimistic, but yeah, how can we continue to do that? I just think keep pushing. The sad thing is, a lot of people are taking it upon themselves, a lot of people from diverse backgrounds are taking it upon themselves to come out with things like Malone did with Mind the Gap, but it causes a stir, and that's how you apply pressure. So yeah, that's what I think can be done.
Thank you, Jess. V, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, first of all, echoing what Jess said, obviously you can't cater to everybody, but I also think that the people who are in charge of setting these curriculums and setting these reading lists and things, I think that they just need to really understand that this really benefits everybody. Like, if you're trying to deliver an education and you want to create an educated future generation, surely you want them to have an understanding of the full picture. Like, why would you want to tell them something from one perspective? And I'm a historian, like, well, my background is mainly in history, so I don't understand why you would want to skirt around some of the truths or avoid certain truths. So I don't get it, because you're not teaching me properly. So I think teachers and professors need to also understand that young people are curious, they want to understand, and it's okay that people have a past. Let's just talk about it openly and let's discuss it up front, and, you know, like, let young people make decisions for themselves. Because what you're doing when you don't have a diverse curriculum, or you're not including different voices, is you're just giving the students one narrative. And we've all heard from Chimamanda, there's a danger in a single story. We know that. So for me, I think it's just trying to drive home the reasons why a lot of Black and brown people are fighting for this, and just trying to help, I guess, those in charge understand it. Because sometimes I feel like people think they've been attacked, or they think that by changing things, you're saying we never want to hear from you again, we just want to hear from certain authors. And no, we want everybody. So yeah, I think we need to just start by going back to the basics of why are we doing this, and hopefully those in charge can understand. Because the last thing you want to do is to have someone teaching history from, let's just say, a Zimbabwean perspective by force. You know, you want everybody to be on board. Like, you are my professor, you should be enjoying this too, you're a historian. Why do you not want to understand the perspective of the people you're talking about? Like, come on. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question. I always go off on tangents, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, V, for your perspective as well. Tosin, would you like to share your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I agree with everything that the other panelists have said so far. I also feel like it's super important for universities to do this from the ground up as well. So starting with their student body, which I can see that a lot of universities are getting much better with their like diversity campaigns, etc., having scholarships to get more students in. And because there is like a huge confidence gap between students who like readily apply for top universities and students who maybe have the ability but don't feel like they're going to fit in or are academically capable enough to be there. So it's important to also highlight the people from certain backgrounds who have progressed on to attend top universities, etc., because it can be so inspiring to other students to just see themselves in certain positions. Even events like this, like that, promote these type of conversations, etc. So if these students get into these good universities, whatever, I think that could also lead to like having more professors who teach, you know, more diverse subjects, etc. I did a similar panel before, and this was a point that was flagged as well, and that there were a lot of, you know, for example, Black academics, but they weren't getting the same opportunities. So universities do also need to be more open to having these initiatives. And I think the more diverse the student body is as well, the more we can sort of have like a case for promoting that diversity in the curriculum. The first time I actually like formally learned about African history was in my final year of university, when I did an optional course in African economic history. And the stuff that I was being taught was absolutely mind-blowing, and was the first time that I would say I truly understood where I'm from. And even then, it was kind of paradoxical, because I was being taught all of this amazing new information about African history, about, you know, what slavery really was, and even beyond slavery, like what Africans were before the whole slavery situation. But that was also being taught by Europeans. So there was a lack of like the actual Black voice or African voices within that. And some of the methods were quite skewed towards Eurocentric ways of thinking, etc. So even then, it's like, yeah, the curriculum is diverse, but what about the people that are teaching it, and what methods are they using? What readings are they telling the students to read, etc.? Are they skewed towards a certain narrative or a certain way of measuring things, etc., which always paint the same picture of Africa, for example? So that was super, super interesting. So yeah, the opportunities are there, but we also need to be open to including new voices. And just to reiterate what I first mentioned, I also do think like having a more diverse student body definitely helps, so we can have these conversations, conferences like this, to push the idea that the curriculum must be more diverse.
Thank you so much, Tosin, for really unpacking the question and sharing your experiences as well. Thank you so much. Sienna, would you also like to share your own perspective as well?
I'd love to. So my background is I do math and physics. I took my A-levels in math, further math and physics. And one day I was going through my textbook, and I was going through all the pages. I had two textbooks, one from my first year of A-level, one from my second year. So it was probably like 700 pages. And I was going through them, and I couldn't find a single woman represented there. There were hundreds of examples of, oh yeah, this is the man who like for the atom, oh, this is the guy who did this experiment, but there wasn't a single woman. And then I decided that I wanted to explore, you know, the actual exams themselves. And so I went through all the exams, and they would give examples of someone doing an experiment, but they would always say, oh, Bob did this experiment, Dylan did this experiment. There were no women stated in the exam paper. I did find one. There was only one, actually. And I found it funny because when I first saw, her name was Sarah, when I first saw Sarah on the exam paper, I was really excited. I was like, oh, I found a woman. I read the question. The question revolved around trying to find the mistakes in Sarah's practical that she did. And so the one time you list a woman, you list someone who makes, it was probably like 10, 15 mistakes that she made in this one experiment. I'd never seen anything like it in an exam paper like that before. And I just thought, you really need to have people represented. Already they're 20% women in STEM. And then you do something like this so that then the few women who are still there feel like they're a minority, feel like they don't belong, feel like they can't see themselves represented in their textbooks and in the exam papers. And I should also mention that all the men who were in the textbooks were white men. And so there's a problem in that as well. And so I think that we definitely need to start having representation, and we have to start by changing the curriculum, by changing the examples of figures that we give, you know, especially people who we are trying to present as role models and people who have done incredible things within their industry. There should definitely be examples that everybody can look up to and everybody can admire. And you can't do that if they're all just white men.
Thank you, Sienna, for your perspective. And thank you to all the panelists for your answers that you gave, because all of them were insightful and also different, mentioning that it has to be done properly, that the narrative has to be different, also that we can't represent everyone, but there should be steps taken to represent people. So thank you for your insight to that question on diversity. And this question is more of a personal one, but have any of the panelists experienced any form of educational inequality, whether it was your careers advisor, maybe the advice they gave wasn't tailored to your ambitions, maybe it was educational inequality in maybe the feedback you gave? Is there any form of educational inequality that you have experienced? And this is completely open to the panel, so please disclose at your wish.
Yes, I would love to jump in on this one. I think I've told this story many a time, so I apologize if anyone's ever heard it before. But when I was doing my applications for university and I was exploring where to go, I was quite naive, I'll be honest. I really thought I have 3 A grades. That was the time when you had, you know, your first year of A-level results, then your second year. So my first year of A-level results, I said, well, I've got 3 A's. It means any university is open to me and I can apply anywhere. And my teacher quickly humbled me when I went to her and I asked for her help, you know, with my applications. And I said, I'm thinking of Exeter and I'm really thinking of Oxford too. And she was like, yep, let's go ahead with Exeter. That makes sense. But Oxford, I don't think so. Bearing in mind, Exeter had higher grade requirements than Oxford, so that really doesn't make any sense. And she said, yeah, V, this is just not for people like us. And I said, right, how do we navigate this now? Because you are my teacher. My mom is not going to be very helpful because when she migrated to the UK, she really didn't understand the UK education system. I could never go to her for homework help or, you know, saying I've got to revise for SATs. I have to explain to her what SATs are or what GCSEs are. So it wasn't something that I could really do. And it wasn't like I could turn on the TV and I'm going to hear people who are at Oxford talking about being at Oxford or anything like that. So going to my teacher it meant a lot. So her saying no would have really meant no, because she's, number one, the person I look up to academically, and number two, she's writing my references. So if she says no, there's nothing I can do. So I asked her why, and she said, we've never really had an Oxford or Cambridge student at our school. And I didn't understand how that was an excuse, that you say no to your student before they've even began. It's as though I was counted out of the race before I'd even gotten a chance to run. So that really made me mad, and I didn't apply. I didn't even end up applying, and it ate me up for the rest of the year that I cannot believe, despite even having the grades, despite everything could have worked out, but because you just didn't think I could belong there because of a lower working class background, that just didn't make sense to me. So the following year, when I received an email from the Social Mobility Foundation, I hope a lot of you know what that is because they're amazing and they're so, so helpful. And I received an email about the foundation year at Oxford University. That's when I was like, okay, I've got to do this, because everything that the foundation year listed, why they were doing it and who they were speaking to, it was me. I was like, yes, I agree, yes. And I feel like I wasn't supported by my school. Yes, that's me. And it was only through taking a leap of faith and applying for something that I had no idea what was going to happen that I ended up being able to realize my dreams. But my teacher did not even try to come back and say, hey, shall we? I mean, now she's apologized, but that's after the fact. That's after I've gone back to give a talk, and that's after she's, but what if I had gotten in and just stayed quiet, graduated, and that was that? I don't think I'd have gotten an apology. It's simply because she knows she's part of my story now, and she really doesn't like that. But that's what happened. That is really, you told me no. And so that's my little story. And it was a shame, because for lots of Black and brown students, like I said, when you're turning on that TV, you're not hearing the best of things about people who look like you. You're hearing jail, you're hearing they're robbing people, and you're seeing yourselves in America being killed and people being glorified for it and getting away with it. So like when you go to your teacher, the last thing you want to hear is them say no, because the rest of society is telling you no. So I think that was a massive, massive, massive misjudgment on her part, because she really had no grounds. If I had D grades and I was, okay, fine, and I was going in there all bright-eyed for no reason, but there really was no reason for her to say no. So that's my little story.
Thank you, Dee, for sharing your story and opening up to us and the attendees. And I think we tend to undermine the significance of the careers advisor in people's journeys to get from A-levels to university. So thank you for highlighting that. Would anyone else feel comfortable sharing?
I don't mind sharing a little anecdote as well, similar to Dee. So when I first joined my university, I was very, very aware that I had come from a state school background. My university is like very, very international. So there were a lot of students who were privately educated. And I remember especially in my first year of university, not being able to speak up as much at seminars because I felt like I didn't speak a certain way or I didn't portray my points in a certain way. So a lot of the time I would know the answer to a lot of questions, but wouldn't feel like my answer was valid enough, or if I spoke, will I sound a certain way, etc. And then somebody else would say the exact same thing with fluff on it, making it sound all fancy, but it was the exact same answer. And I soon realized that, a lot of people just know how to show off really well. And at the end of the day, we all have the same ability, and that's why we're here. So yeah, over time, I found my confidence when I realized we were all getting the same grades, me sometimes even higher, and that improved my confidence. And then I learned to speak more in class, etc. So one thing I would say is finding my voice and not allowing my background to hinder me from speaking up. And as I've progressed at university, even in my career, I'm increasingly realizing how it's so important to be different and how you can bring your difference to the table. And because a lot of these careers, law, for example, can be so traditional as well, it is nice to, sometimes come in and add, an extra bit of flavor by being yourself and being completely different sometimes. So if I can give one big key piece of advice today as well, it will be embrace your difference and don't think that your background is going to hold you back in any way. And those people that act like they know everything, trust me, sometimes they're showing off.
Thank you, Tosin, for providing your insight into your experience as well, being from a state school student and coming to university where there's different people from affluent backgrounds, and being in your space and owning that. So thank you. I'm just mindful of time, and I really want to make sure that the attendees that have questions get the questions answered. So if it's okay, I'm just going to read some of the questions that they have. So we'll start the Q&A now. This one is for Sienna. So Celeste asks, as a person who is neurodivergent, do you struggle with being able to understand emotion over virtual lectures and seminars, or is it beneficial?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely drawbacks to virtual communication. Something with me is I'm autistic, And so I struggle to read body language, and that's always been an issue. But I've known I'm autistic for 6 years, and I figured out ways to do that. And part of it is I can hear when someone's about to speak because they take like a little breath in before they start talking. And so I know, okay, when I hear that, I have to stop talking so that then I don't interrupt somebody, or so that I don't start talking at the same time as somebody else. On virtual learning, that is not a thing. And so I am constantly kind of like interrupting people accidentally, kind of making errors in that way. And it is stressful to do. And a lot of the coping mechanisms that I had in the real world just aren't applicable. And so that is, you know, definitely a problem, but there are also lots of benefits. I have a sensory processing disorder that means that, you know, I don't like going into unfamiliar environments because I do get panic attacks when things are too loud or too bright. And the other day, I was doing an interview. I'm applying to, I've already gotten into Stanford, but I have applied to Harvard and MIT, and so I was doing an interview for MIT. And thank you. And I was really nervous about it. And so I joined the call. And I remember I was sitting in the waiting room and I was like, oh my God, imagine if this were in like real life and I were sitting in some kind of busy waiting room. Waiting rooms love to have like white wallpaper. And so there's all this white and there's all these like people walking around and I'm just like really nervous. And I just, you know, started thinking about how as an autistic individual, my performance is really based off my sensory processing disorder. Like if I have a panic attack 3 minutes before an interview because someone slammed a door really loudly, like I'm not going to do well in that interview. And so then I went in and I had one of the best interviews I've ever had in my life because I was able to communicate the way I wanted to, and I didn't have to worry about any unpredictabilities because I was in my own home. And so through doing that, I was like, okay, like this is a real benefit to doing things virtually that I really appreciate.
Thank you, Sienna, for your answer to the question. We've also got another question, and the question is, what do you think about assessment in the UK? I'm studying education studies in GSD, and we are currently talking about how pupils from less wealthy / different backgrounds are more likely to fail, i.e. the new GCSE focusing on mostly the wealthy white perspective instead of a diverse world. And this is from Luana. So Jess, would you like to answer the question?
Sure. So she's asking, does she think that the new system makes students struggle more because it focuses on wealthy white perspectives? Is that what she's saying?
Yeah, I think she's referring to how assessments in the UK, they mostly tailor for people from affluent backgrounds because they have the resources compared to students who don't have those resources. So what are your views?
I think the assessments in the UK, I mean, they were already struggling before the pandemic, and I think, you know, the whole thing now is a joke. I'm so confused with what's going on, let alone if I was a student as well. Do I think that you will struggle more if you're learning about wealthy white perspectives? Not necessarily. I don't think that you have to be Black to learn Black history and then you're going to do well because you're Black and you relate. No, I don't think that's the case. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be diverse. I think more like what V said, you need to be aware of all the different voices to actually have a better worldview. I mean, our education growing up helps us navigate the world, and not including other voices in that doesn't help our navigation. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah.
Thank you, Jess. We've got quite a few questions, so I'm just trying to get through as many as possible. How do you deal with imposter syndrome or feeling like the token Black girl in a predominantly white space? Also, congrats on all your achievements. This was anonymous, so Tosin, do you want to jump in?
How do I deal with imposter syndrome? To be honest, if I'm perfectly honest, it's definitely something that I still struggle with, and then I have to click myself back into it. Because as you will notice, you go into education, like I mentioned earlier, like going into university, I had that imposter syndrome, being from a state school background, thinking that, you know, I'm not smart enough to be here, etc. Finished university, then started my LPC legal practice course, which was also with a lot, my classes were like predominantly white, etc. A lot of people who went to maybe some even better universities than me. And then that imposter syndrome kicked in again. And then I did well as I got along and got more confident in myself and realized that, oh my God, I do deserve to be here. And then dealt with that better. But then I started my job as a trainee solicitor in this law firm, and the imposter syndrome kicked in again because I'm dealing with completely new subject matter. I'm looking around, there aren't that many people who particularly look like me, or I assume that other people might be a certain way because they look a certain way, because at the end of the day, everyone does have those biases, but you'll be surprised at how many people you can actually like connect with that are not from your background. So yeah, that is something that I definitely still battle with sometimes. And I would say I've used like my performance and like hard facts to rewire my brain, like realizing that, okay, I have this fear that maybe I'm not good enough or I'm not as good as the next person. But in reality, what are the actual facts of this situation? How am I actually doing? What is my feedback actually saying? What are the people who work with me saying about my work? And using that as a basis for how I feel about myself as opposed to my assumptions, if that makes sense. So maybe sometimes look at your CV and, you know, gas yourself up a little bit. You know, you got the grades to be where you are, and, you know, realize that you deserve to be there. So in a nutshell, using the facts as opposed to my assumptions of the situation that I'm in, that is how I am getting over imposter syndrome, because I can't say that it's completely gone.
Thank you, Tosin, for your answer. And thank you to all the answers that the panelists have been giving so far. It's such an insightful conversation, and these conversations are not always had, especially during conferences. So a huge thank you so far. We have a question. What do you think the government should do to expand education learning to be more inclusive for disabled people? So Sienna, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah, no, there are many ways that I could answer this, and I could talk for days about it, but I think it's important to answer this in the context of maybe COVID. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and they were telling me about how when COVID first broke out in March, they were being home educated because of their autism. They had been excluded from school. School told them that they could no longer go there because they didn't want to accommodate and give them the reasonable adjustments they needed, which is illegal, but the school did it nonetheless, and so they were being home educated. Well, the government then came out and said, okay, teachers have to predict grades. Well, that couldn't happen because they were being taught by their mother. And so they then had to wait another year. So they had to delay going to university, take a gap year. Well, they were going to do their A-levels this year. Well, there's another year of teacher predicted grades. And so now they're doing a 2-year gap year because their school kicked them out because they're autistic. And they've gone to every single person in power they can find. They're trying to launch a campaign. They're trying to do something about this because they can't afford to take a 2-year gap year. For them, they had to go to university. Well, nobody cares. And I was looking online, and this is such a common problem right now. And I think it's just despicable that schools kick people out for having a disability and then they're penalized in this way. Like the government didn't think about people who were being homeschooled, didn't think about all the disabled people who they created an education system where these autistic people couldn't be included. These disabled people couldn't have a place there. And now they're just kind of pushing them out even further and denying them a university place as well. And so I think that definitely needs to change.
Thank you, Sienna, as well, for providing that perspective. And it just goes to show that a lot still needs to be done by the governments and implementing that necessary social policy for people to have access to the necessary education they need. So thank you. Our final question is for V, and someone asks, as a person from an Asian background, I feel that I am faced with stereotypes of always being successful and achieve the best grades. How would you advise me to be more confident in myself to pursue the career that I would like to do? This is by Fitzroy.
Well, this answer I feel like plays into imposter syndrome, but maybe the other way around in a funny way. And it kind of speaks to what Tosin was saying earlier about having to sit down and look at the hard, strong facts, right? Whatever you're about to pursue, whether it's a degree or your career for the next 2, 3 years, 5, 6 years, like if you're like Jess doing medicine, you're doing medicine, right, Jess? If you're going to pursue this for the next 6 years, 3 years, whatever, you've got to love what you're doing. When those essay crisis moments hit, when those late night moments of thinking I want to quit hit, what's going to pull you through is your passion for what you're doing and like your end goal and your reasoning. And now if your motivation is someone else's happiness, which I assume you might be talking about parents here or family members, they're not going to be in that library with you. They're not. So I feel like as much as obviously we have to respect our family and, you know, they advise from a point of what they know. And I had to really understand that with my mom, because at first we used to butt heads. She wanted a doctor. She wanted a doctor. And I absolutely respect doctors, but I couldn't do it. I'm too squirmish. It's not in me. And that is okay. Okay. It's fine that that's not in me. But my mom was like, I gave birth to a doctor, and had to let her know gently, you didn't. You gave birth to V, who's going to be whatever she wants to be. So I feel like trying to navigate these conversations with your parents is difficult, but also trying to understand where they're coming from. A lot of our parents, well, my parent anyway, she migrated from Zimbabwe to England. All she knew was survival. And for her, the profession of doctor, nurse, that is how you're going to pay your bills, and that's what she knows. So she's pushing me towards that because she wants to see me survive. So sometimes you going and saying, hey, I want to study English or history, your parents are like, this is unfamiliar territory. What does this mean? Does this mean my child is basically going to be in the streets just doing nothing? That's what they hear. They hear English, they hear jobless, right? So you need to just, first of all, sit down with them, come to a place, because I know for a lot of people, if their parents say no, that's it. Like there is no, because they might not have financial support or whatever the repercussions of going against your parents are. So I think trying to reason with them and really saying, this is like a new generation. This is a new time where my skills that I'll gain from history, archaeology, English, I can still pay the bills. I can still, because I think a lot of parents, once they see a check, they're okay. But it takes up until that point. And to get to that point, they've got to let you do what you want to do, but they won't let you do what you want to do until you have the check. So it's kind of double-edged sword. So I think for you, worrying about wanting to be successful and wanting to please them, try and find the middle ground. You know, do what you want to do, but show them you can do it and be successful in it. And remember to really do what you want. Honestly, like it's the one thing that I could give advice to is follow your passion and what drives you. What is it that makes you want to get up and do? Because yeah, especially now in a pandemic, living in a pandemic and having to do things online on Zoom day in, day out, and you're doing it for someone else. It's not gonna, you can't sustain that. You really can't. And what often happens as well is once you do this degree that your parents want you to do, when you have that degree, you might have to go to that profession. So it's going to be a lifetime of just not being happy, right? It's not just about the degree you choose or the profession you choose. It's a lifetime. So yeah, try and find the balance and explain to them, walk them through it. Don't just assume your parents understand, because sometimes they just don't.
Okay, thank you to all our panelists. You've been absolutely amazing, and it's been lovely to hear all of your perspectives, all of your journeys, your experiences. And I wish I could talk to you forever, but unfortunately time is at the essence. But we will be hearing from one of our speakers who wasn't able to make it here live, but she did send in a pre-recorded message, and it's a bit of a source of motivation for GCSE and A-level students. So.
Aside from your grades, and aside from the fact that you will be advancing from GCSE to A-levels and from A-levels to university, if that is the route you choose, if there's anything I want you to take away from this question, is that you will be remembered as the most resilient and youngest generation that we have ever had to go through such a life-changing experience in such a short amount of time. You have all adapted to this situation really quickly, and because of that, you have demonstrated, first and foremost, your courage to be able to deal with uncertain times and embrace uncertain times without even knowing what is at the end of it. And that takes a lot of courage to do. So if you haven't heard anyone say this, this is what I'm telling you. Your grades won't reflect your courage, but what will reflect your courage is how you approach your next opportunity with optimism, knowing that you have gone through one of the hardest things that life has had to throw at you. Some people have lost their parents, some people have lost loved ones, some people have had an opportunity to really think about what their education means to them and some of the opportunities they would like to take forward once they've completed their grades or their assessments or their exams. Whatever comes from your exams never defines who you are as an individual. When I did my A-levels, when I did my GCSEs, I thought that this would be the final say for my career and for my future. But what I realised really quickly is that that was not the truth. Actually, my grades didn't speak for me. My grades didn't determine the future I would have. That was based on how I perceived my future. And that was based on the control I had with carving out the career and the life I wanted to see myself experience when I was older. And that is the same for you. Even if your grades don't show the amount of effort you have put in over the last 2 years, that will never take away from who you are and who you are becoming.
All right, there we have it. So thank you to all our amazing education panelists. You have been absolutely amazing. Thank you to Tosin, Jess, Ivy, you couldn't be here, Sienna and V. And yeah, so we will now be moving on to the next part of our conference, which will be a spotlight session and a break, and that'll be led by our